Good afternoon, everybody. I see that the Zoom room is filling up here. As you join us here for a evening edition of the virtual speaker series, go ahead and open up the chat box and tell us who you are and where you're from and your Penn State class year. You could also use the Q&A tab down on the bottom of your Zoom if you want to ask our panelists any questions on what it's like to have children learning in a remote environment, or any of the things that you might be struggling with now with children in either a hybrid model or fully remote. Go ahead and drop your questions into the Q&A tab. Again, welcome in. Open up your chat and let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from today. We will be getting started in just 2 minutes. I see Joanne from New Jersey. I see Peter Mecca, PhD in CNI Science Education from the class of '87. Welcome, Peter. He's down in Herndon, Virginia, not too far from where one of our presenters is. Will is coming to us live tonight from Manassas, Virginia. Again, welcome everybody. We will be getting started in just a minute or two. Again, go ahead and tell us who you are and where you're from in the chat. I see Kay from Altoona. Welcome, Kay. You'll also notice that just appeared in the chat that this session is being closed captioned. If you are interested in activating the closed caption in Zoom, you can go ahead and do that. Just click on closed caption in the bottom of your Zoom browser, and then you can click on show subtitles. That'll activate it for you in Zoom. Or if you'd like to customize your caption view, you can click on the link that is in the chat box now. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker session, which is being recorded. As I mentioned earlier, live closed captions are available for this event. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom window and then clicking show subtitle. You may also customize your caption view by clicking the stream text link that is posted in our chat box. This evening, we welcome a panel of 3 experts who will discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic has created challenges for parents, children, and schools in the new school year. Additionally, these experts will also share advice on how parents can find short-term solutions and be part of the long-term evolution of their children's schools. Today's discussion is just the latest installment in a recurring series of virtual programming brought to you by the Penn State Alumni Association. You can view a full list of our virtual programs on our website at alumni.psu.edu/events. Our 3 experts joining us this evening are Dr. Will Deal, Rebecca Heiser, and Dr. Peggy Schooling. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Deal and Schooling and Rebecca, and I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay. Well, while Rebecca's getting the PowerPoint up here on the screen, I'll just say hello and welcome everyone. I'm Will Deal, and it's a privilege to be a part of this event. I'm a two-time grad of Penn State. My bachelor's degree is in elementary education, and my PhD is in adult education with an emphasis in distance education. I also have a background in web design and development. I've worked in the corporate world for companies that focused on online collaboration and corporate online education. And I'm currently a faculty member in the College of Education in the Lifelong Learning and Adult Ed program. I coordinate the online graduate programs, and I'm also the director of the American Center for the Study of Distance Education and associate editor for the American Journal of Distance Ed. And I'd like to just take this opportunity to invite you over to the American Center for the Study of Distance Education, and we can get you that information. But I'll move on here and let you know that, as Paul said, I'm joined by my colleagues Peggy Schooling and Rebecca Heiser, and we wanted to provide you with some of our thoughts on the challenges for school systems really across the globe, and offer some ideas on a way to move forward. Everyone in our communities has been affected by this situation that we're in, and it's been particularly challenging for parents and students. So in this discussion, we want to provide some insights with some steps that folks can take for short-term solutions, but also to discuss ways that parents can be a part of the evolution of their schools to benefit their children. The coronavirus has definitely presented us all with challenges. We're looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts on those. And we also see it as an extraordinary opportunity for school systems to evolve and to become higher quality, more efficient, and to provide more equity and access for students across the country. So this time I'll pass the mic over to Peggy. And Peggy's the director of the Pennsylvania School Study Council that is associated with the College of Ed at Penn State.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining. Yes, as Will said, I'm the executive director of the Pennsylvania School Study Council, which has been around for about 70 years. And I'm also a professor in the Education Leadership department. So I want to start you out by actually asking you to think about your best experience and worst learning experience in a classroom. Just take a moment to do that. So no doubt you probably can recall an amazing experience, and just as likely one that left you perhaps frustrated or disengaged. And so, during COVID, we often talk about this time in education as crisis education. The media, parents, and educators are really trying to work through this, and we try to attempt to make comparisons between what we're doing in crisis education and the traditional learning that we are used to. But the research tells us it's really difficult to do. So today, we hope to help you think about the focus of learning as central to distance education. So I want you to think about this. Have you ever watched a video or social media to learn something? Maybe it was on your phone or on your computer. Could have been Alexa. You might have listened to a podcast, TV, or radio. So one of the things that we are, really fortunate at this time in our lives is that education, in education, technology continues to evolve, and it's really something that supports learning. But really, when we talk today, we hope that you will also see that technology is a tool, but central to that is how we go about learning. So the question is, do you need a classroom to learn? So now ask yourself that. Does all learning take place in a structured environment, like a classroom? Think about learning to ride a bike, or learning a musical instrument, or even assembling a piece of furniture, or learning parenting skills from a book. Think about that for a moment. So I want you to think about those three questions and now consider conditions that help you learn outside of the classroom. So think about whether learning was formal or informal. So informal might have been that you watched a quick video to figure out how to create a web page, Or it could have been more formal in that you went to a class that was facilitated by an instructor that walked you step by step. Maybe some of the learning that you've experienced outside the classroom involves some choice. Maybe it involves some personalization. Maybe it was really scaffolded. In other words, that if you were a novice at learning something like learning how to, in my case, fall out of a kayak safely, or more advanced and you might have needed a different level of instruction and support in order to learn. So many of us have had experiences outside of the classroom for which we have learned, and we often recognize as we reflect back on that, those experiences have often been authentic, at a time of need, have been personalized to our own learning, and have been scaffolded. So I'm going to turn that over to Will now as we start to move into thinking about what is distance education and the history behind that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peggy. Even though remote or virtual or distance education feels new to many people, and we may be working through all the growing pains of the crisis management that's happening in schools all over the world, really, there is a very long, successful history of distance education that's benefited millions of students. And a lot of people don't know it, but there's an entire field of study that's dedicated to distance education. There are researchers, emerging scholars, and practitioners, and there is at least 50 years of research that shows us that distance education can be as effective and high quality as face-to-face education if it's done well. And the key there is if it's done well. And Peggy was alluding to this, what I'm saying here in one of her first questions. If you think back to the classroom, it can be done well, or sometimes it's not as effective as it might be. This slide is basically just to show you that the field has evolved over the last 200 years. As soon as the Postal Service was established and the common person was able to mail a letter to other people, there were some entrepreneurs and educators who decided that they would be able to teach via correspondence education or via the Postal Service. And as technology evolved, radio came about, you had television, satellites, there's mobile learning using cell phones, and even telephones. So as technologies have evolved, there are different modes of delivery. And even today we have people studying online, correspondence education is still happening on the planet. And it's even being used in this new crisis management situation that we're in right now. So this slide really just kind of reinforces the relationship between technology and distance education. As technology evolves, it presents new opportunities, but we also have issues of access across the globe. And so people can still rely on what you might call lower tech types of delivery when we're talking about distance education. So you have to take a look at a system and a community in order to figure out what the best mode of delivery might be. And it could be a combination of modes. So I will pass it over to, or is this, yeah. I just talked about access, and distance education through the years has provided access to people who may not have been able to get into a classroom in the past. So distance education has always been about providing access and equal opportunity for learners.
So it's always helpful to situate the context by reviewing the terminology to help us ground our conversation. And there's a lot of overlapping terms out there. So let's take a look at what is distance education. And distance education is planned learning that normally occurs in a different place from teaching, requiring special techniques of course design and instruction, communication through various technologies, and special organizational and administrative arrangements. Planned is emphasized here, not only because it provides an improved learning experience due to purposeful instructional design and thoughtful uses of technology, but also because those decisions occur within a structured system. So during the past few months, educators, parents, and students were thrown into what may be described as a crisis distance learning, or an impromptu pivot to distance learning delivery to meet the demands of statewide shelter-in-place orders. A more planned approach takes advantage of delivery methods that are both asynchronous, which is when interactions happen over time, or synchronous, which is happening in real time, such as tonight's meeting. Some of these advantages, for example, shift away from traditional teacher-centered models, in which an educator presents in a one-way delivery method and utilizes a static artifact, such as a textbook, and works through a linear assessment plan. Instead, this shift moves towards a student-centered learning design. By putting students in the center of the learning process, educators can employ active learning strategies such as project-based learning to encourage real-world and authentic assessments to meet both critical thinking and reflection in a meaningful way. This kind of teaching and learning can occur in each of these educational models, and that also means that one educational model is not better or less than the other. So my colleagues, Peggy, Will, and I have been rolling up our sleeves, and we're working in partnership with the Pennsylvania Department of Education to guide leaders to contextualize and develop a parallel system that supports continuity in education. This system's infrastructure can support snow days to a global pandemic. And part of this system's infrastructure looks very similar to this. This is a system of distance education that focuses with learning predominantly situated in the middle. With learning at the center, each of these components, leadership, teaching, design and development, delivery and modality, are interrelated and made up of structured subsystems. In addition to these high-level components, community, access, stakeholders, and equity and inclusion are all embedded in all of the decisions, the values, practices, and strategies. Due to the response to the crisis, many teachers have taken on the burden to hold all of these components together. However, the system puts in place not only support for teachers, but also provides a planned approach to offer high-quality learning for our students with support from the community and includes stakeholders like our parents. I'm going to turn this back over to Will.
All right, thank you. So some of the things that we're trying to encourage people to think about instruction during this time in a few different ways. One is interaction between students and teachers. This is very familiar in a face-to-face classroom, and you hear a lot of instances these days where teachers are meeting with students directly on Zoom and having synchronous sessions. The other mode that we want people to start thinking about is student-to-student interaction. And that, an example of this is when a teacher would split people up into groups. You can do that online these days. You can even do that, in Zoom. There are breakout rooms, but in other modes, you could have people meeting, working asynchronously or synchronously in groups, and students communicating with one another, developing social skills in those ways as well. And then the other way to think about this is student to content. And in an asynchronous class, for example, students can read content that's been developed beforehand. It can be books, it can be worksheets, it could be videos that are developed. and students can interact with the content in those ways. So what we hope is that people are thinking about different ways to interact, and that we're not just having, for example, 6 hours of Zoom straight through during the day for anyone. It's tough on graduate students, it's tough on professionals, and it's especially tough on our K-12 students as well. So I'm just going to cover a few of the benefits, or multiple benefits, of distance education. I had mentioned access before. Distance education definitely can offer access which provides more equity across the board. It can be, there's more universal opportunities, and it's more accessible, and it can be more inclusive. The opportunity for more rigor is there as well with distance education. You can have self-pacing, and which is also leads to more personalized learning for students. Students can be more reflective, especially when you have asynchronous type of learning going on. So a student could read something, they can sit back and reflect on what they've read, and then they could, in a future discussion, then they could talk about what they've learned, or what the takeaway is. I imagine that some people in this session have been in a classroom, and there's discussion going on, and they might have needed more time to sit back and reflect before they feel comfortable expressing their ideas and talking about what they've learned. There's more independence possible in distance education, and it can be well planned and really purposeful. And again, I want to say that there is a great deal of opportunity to personalize things. And finally, there are 21st century skills and competencies that would include media sharing and media creation, learning how to vet online content and articles and videos, and also to develop effective communication skills. One thing that we were joking about before we came on here was that Peggy and I have never met face to face before, and we've been working on projects together here, and Rebecca and I have only met, we were trying to remember if it's once or twice, but we have only seen each other a couple times face to face because she's out in San Diego. So you can develop communication skills, and you can work online and via a distance. So, so moving forward, what we want to encourage people is that, to have compassion for, to know, and I know Peggy's gonna comment here too, but everyone's really trying their hardest, and they're working on this as much as they can, and there are some issues and things going on, but we think that this is really an opportunity for people.
Great. So we want to talk a little bit about something that Rebecca mentioned briefly as part of the systems thinking of distance education is really about the community. And one of the things that we know is that there's a long-standing history in America of community involvement in schools, and that's been a great thing. Over the years, schools have always benefited from additional resources to educate students, and these resources are varied in terms of materials, people, services, and programs, which have often enhanced the educational experience of kids and families. And if you think about your own children, perhaps you benefited from before and after school care. Perhaps your kids were involved in homework helpers. Perhaps you had involvement with other agencies in your community that supported extracurricular activities. And now during the pandemic, I think this has been a great opportunity for us to maximize those community resources and also reimagine them in the same way that we're thinking about reimagining schools. So when we think about that, for example, what is the role that business leaders or managers and other people who are uniquely equipped with special skills, how can they help? So one of the things that we have started to see, for example, is like the YWCA and YMCA programs, uniquely equipped, have been for a very long time providing supportive services for kids, and now are now being created into learning centers. So learning centers where kids are able to work remotely with the support of an adult and other students to do their work, and they may not be in school. Another really good example is WPSU and PBS and Pennsylvania have worked really, really hard to provide online and television programming to kids across the state. In fact, one of the things they did beautifully was to align standards with activities that families can access on television, and also for teachers to utilize resources that are on the internet. And in the future, we hope to hear and see more technologies that are going to come out that will make even more opportunities of programming available to kids. So I think, as always, communities have always stepped up, and I think they will continue to do that. And I think as parents, some of us have some of those skills that we could lend to schools. And I was thinking about the other day, how teachers, how libraries are now opening up. Museums are providing virtual field trips that allow kids to really see the world in a way that perhaps they didn't do before. And these are all great opportunities for kids, number one, to learn more about the world, also to develop 21st century skills and thinking as well. So, I think I'm a parent. I'm a parent of two children. They're survived childhood and now are young adults. And, I think of myself as an educator also, and as a parent, always trying to advocate for, what's best for kids, right? And certainly as parents, we want what's best for our own children. And as a community of folks, we want what's best for all of our children. So, that involves some advocacy. And so some of the things that we started to think about is like, what are some of those questions that we should ask? And I think, as Will said earlier, this pandemic has created a sense of urgency to reestablish, reinvent, and maybe even reimagine what school can look like. And if truth be told, the current system has not always served everybody. Some of our most vulnerable children have not been well served by this traditional system that we have in place. So as parents, in the community, what do you ask? So one of the things that, we've talked about is like really thinking about what works for whom. In other words, is a one-size-fit approach the best approach? Given that we now have technology to do that, we can offer ways to support learning through the use of technology. Support training and development. All of us, I'm sure, as parents and even as educators, have had to figure out on the fly how to use tools like Zoom and Google Docs and Seesaw and Schoology and Canvas and a whole list of things, and thousands of applications to boot. So I think as a parent, it's really critical to advocate for training for parents, advocate for training for teachers, advocate for training for administrators, because this is a really complex system, as Will talked about and Rebecca shared, that has a lot of moving parts that are interlocking, and folks were thrown into this really quickly. No one would have imagined a year ago that we would have been tossed into a pandemic of epic proportions that we're experiencing now. So how to do that moving forward so that parents, families, teachers, administrators get the kind of training they need. Most important, my background is in curriculum and instruction, and probably my bias is that it's all about the learning, and that the way to ensure that kids have access and equitable access to a curriculum is to make sure that it's what we talk about as being guaranteed and viable. In other words, that all kids have access to a curriculum. So what does that mean? That means not just a textbook, but a curriculum that really aligns clear learning outcomes for kids, grade level expectations, and assessments that offer choice for students, that give some flexibility, that are aligned with the learning outcomes so that some kids can move at their own pace and experience personalized learning. That's going to be really important. And the fourth is really for us to think about, what is schooling? What is learning? Is it about participation or is it about attendance? So the current system that we have in place, and Rebecca and Will talked about this earlier, is this idea of replicating a 6-hour school day is unsustainable. And that kind of focuses on sort of the idea of attendance, right? Where a system that's aligned to learning goals with clear outcomes and instructional activities that are aligned with that really provide an opportunity for us to think about participation and what does that look like. And that's going to be, I think, that's a hard nut to crack. It's going to take time. It's going to take redesign. But as Rebecca said, it's about redesigning a planned experience so that kids can be successful. And then the last one, and you've heard me say it, you've probably heard Rebecca say it, and Will, the technology there is to serve the learning. And so we should always first think about, what is it that we want kids to know and be able to do? And then think about the technology or types of technology that can support the learning. I think what's happening right now is that because everybody's experiencing this crisis and this is all new, that we're trying to use all of this technology first, and that's natural because we don't always know how to use it or are not comfortable with it. Instead of focusing what is it I want my kids to know and be able to do, and what technology is going to support that. So, the last thing we really want to do is actually engage with all of you, because we want this to be interactive. And also, if you have further questions, for you to contact us. There are 2 ways to do that. You can contact me through the Pennsylvania Study Council, which actually has been at Penn State for over 70 years. And what we do is try to bridge the research from Penn State with practitioners in the field. And we do a lot of professional development and technical assistance with schools all over the state. And then also connecting with Will through the American Center for the Study of Distance Education, because we've been running some forums for K-12, pre-K-12 folks to really come together and say, wow, how can we solve this problem? What are you doing? And sharing the expertise of others. So we are really looking forward to hearing your questions and engaging with you this evening.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation. Again, you can ask questions in the Q&A box, or if you are on Facebook, you can ask questions in the comment section. Just make a comment. We have had up to 27 people on Facebook listening to your presentation, and a couple others in almost over 20 here in the Zoom room. Prior to the pandemic, how much progress had been made in the area of online education targeted towards school-age children? I'm thinking elementary, secondary, right, like pre-collegiate. How much work had been done in that space?
Actually, quite a bit of work. Across the country, I would say it spans, but you can go 20 years back in the United States or further to find instances where schools were dabbling in that. And more recently, in the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen quite a lot of schools dabbling in blended learning, or sometimes referred to as hybrid learning. And so the range is all over the place. And of course, some of that has to do with resources, has to do with access to broadband, for example. And so it varies, but it's been happening. The challenge is that some of the research is often done by doctoral students who go back into their settings, and that research is really specific to their setting. And so that's a field and an area, and Rebecca can certainly talk more about that, that probably needs further research.
Yeah, I would echo what Peggy said. A lot of the uptick was really beginning in the 90s. We saw a lot of it with virtual schools. We can also, just reiterating what Peggy said as well, is that practice is outpacing research. And so there's a lot of opportunity with that. But there's also a lot of the research that's been done with K-12 distance education systems has really been contextual, and it's been hard to replicate a lot of those case studies across different contexts. And finally, we've also been able to identify that a lot of the schools that were already dabbling in this, if they were already approaching blended learning or providing blended learning opportunities, have come out ahead during the COVID response.
And I'll just add the historical, another historical note here that, correspondence education has benefited students for over 100 years. So this is not new. We went from correspondence education to radio to television, and the technology's changed, but the practice is still happening. Some of the same issues, you had some of the same issues back in the 1920s as we have right now. So we have this long history, and there's been a lot of research in the field.
What are some of the challenges to developing online curriculums? I think of a seventh grader taking algebra, right? Because they may be more advanced versus an 11th or 12th grader that may be taking algebra because that's when they got to it in their high school studies. I think of students who learn at different paces. Does that provide a challenge in terms of developing curriculum and developing learning tools because everybody who's interacting with that tool may be coming at it at either a different pace or a different perspective? I see shaking heads.
Yes, I'll start.
Yeah, expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, no. So, one of the things that we are, experiencing is our world of K-12 is set up by grades, right? And that's right. Artificial arrangement that was done 100 years ago, really as a way to efficiently move kids through a system, right? That was the reason behind it. It was during the industrial age, and we needed effective, efficient ways to move masses, publicly educate children. And so that worked. So the idea is really to think about what are some of those structures that have been in place that are broken, and to look at what the curriculum is, what are the grade standards, what are the grade expectations, creating learning outcomes from them, and then creating experiences for kids and assessments. So when we start to break the grade structures, and there are actually some schools actually in Pennsylvania that have done a really good job of that, who've broken the traditional grade structures of, say, K1 and 2, and really looked at it in terms of the level, the expectations. Because what we know about development is it's uneven. You can have a kiddo in kindergarten who might be reading, at a first grade level, but is just beginning their mathematical understanding, might be very much like a kindergartner. So breaking up those structures means having a written curriculum that's clear, that's planned, okay? And then also being able to think about how to do that differently. Does it take planning? Does it take time? Absolutely. And that's why it's taken some schools longer than others to move in that direction. Rebecca, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I would pick up from a course design perspective that we're always making purposeful designs, not only in our courses, but across the curriculum. So we're always thinking about the tools and the technologies that we employ, how those can be consistent so that we're not just using one tool for one course just one time. There's always this challenge of having two learning curves, one learning how to use the tool, and the other one learning the actual content and showing mastery of that information. So a lot of it from a course and instructional design perspective is working hand in hand with the curriculum, making sure that there's alignment, working on learning objectives, thinking about how those objectives are best utilized through various assessment strategies. Assessment strategies is a very critical part of this because we want to employ active learning strategies. We don't want this to be a prescriptive answer to the question. We want to think about ill-structured problems and how students can think outside of the box to resolve those. And that also challenges students, getting back to Will's point about providing 21st century skills, right? So a lot of the things that we can see in distance learning is that students are being challenged to communicate in various different ways, whether it's through developing a video or providing a response in a text box, thinking about how they can synthesize big content into maybe 250 words or less. So there's a lot of ways that we can go about supporting the curriculum and thinking very purposeful about the course design as well.
So this is maybe more at the, the example I'm going to use is more at the collegiate level, but I know that it's an issue that educators at all levels are facing right now. So my daughter is registered for a class. The class that she's going to be taking as a freshman is being offered remotely, but that class has a chemistry lab with it. So I'm thinking, oh, she's going to be on a kitchen counter somewhere doing a chemistry experiment. Do you have some research articles related to how to engage learners in distance education around laboratory science that might have happened in a classroom but is now happening in distance education?
Yeah, I can talk to that question a little bit. At the American Center for the Study of Distance Ed, we've had a couple people, experts who teach science, and they've talked exactly about those topics. And there are a lot of examples. There are now virtual labs. There are safe ways to provide students with kits that they can use at home. So there are ways to do this kind of thing. And these days, you know, with artificial intelligence and broadband, especially for college students, increasing, there are virtual labs where students can actually do live experiments in a lab and not be there. I mean, you know, everyone's heard of operations taking place these days where the doctors are not even in the same space. So the technology is there and it's getting even better.
So a question coming in from somebody here in the audience. Have you talked to parents of young children? Do they want their children in front of screens all day? Is this how young children want to learn? First, let's address the first part of that question on the concern over screen time. I know we have that concern already with kids this age, just and playing games and interacting with friends online, and now they're taking classes online. So what have you heard from parents, and what have your studies shown about students being in front of screens and their amount of screen time?
I don't know if any of us can speak to from the medical piece of that. And I know there are some people out there that are doing that research, but I think from an educational point of view, what we could say is that we would not want a kindergartner to be online all day long or a preschooler to be online. I think in talking, I just recently had a great conversation with a kindergarten teacher who felt really confident about being able to provide experiences to the kids online with lots of other kinds of activities happening. Now, that means that somebody may or may not be supporting the kids at home, and that is a challenge that we need to kind of work through and think through, and that's part of why we talk about how community involvement can be supportive in that way. But I do think, you know, and again, it's also about under this situation, dealing with a crisis, we don't have a choice, right? It's the way that we have to behave. So how can we make that better? But, you know, in a sort of larger picture moving forward, I think it's really important for us to think about for whom
Right.
does learning work best, for whom does a virtual learning work best, and for whom does a face-to-face or a hybrid work best. And I think those are the kind of decisions that we're going to need to make in the future, because truth be told, some kids may do very, very well completely virtual, and some kids may not. And I think we need to figure that out.
And I'd like to pick up from that point. First, there's an author that I would recommend who talks a lot about screen time, talks about social emotional cues on how we as humans are interacting with technology. I would recommend reading some of the books from Sherry Turkle. She also has a few TED Talks, so there's a lot of resources that she's provided to that point. One of the other things, just with what Peggy was sharing, is that distance education and learning can support learners in different ways. And so learners come in with unique characteristics and preferences on how they prefer to learn. We have found that English second language learners actually do much better in asynchronous learning environments because it gives them that opportunity to pause and reflect and maybe, you know, think twice or 5 times through their response before they submit it to their teacher. There are definitely a lot of opportunities getting back to accessibility for folks who may not have been able to attend school in a traditional format. So we talk often and a lot about multimodal learning. And multimodal learning means that students are able to interact with the content in a multitude of ways. And that gets back to Will's point about the 3 interactions, right? So it's talking about how students are interacting with a video. For example, tonight we have closed captions, so we're providing access for hearing impaired participants, but it's also providing a text reading, you know, scope for folks who might prefer to read, not just hear and listen, or hear and view. So it's the ways that people are interacting with technology, and it's thinking about it through a visual lens, an auditorial lens, a textual lens, and really helping people utilize the content in a multitude of ways. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for all these folks.
And something I think we talk about too also is, and it's been around for a while, this idea of a framework called Universal Design for Learning, right? It's not new. It's often known best by special education teachers, but it really is a framework for planning instruction to meet all of the needs of the learner, right? In terms of different modalities. And so that's something that, you know, we strongly recommend is really, it's one, because it offers an opportunity to make sure that we're providing equitable learning experiences for all kids, that kids can access what they're learning, in other words.
Right. So I think of everything that you're talking about and how exciting this is, you know, when we've returned to normal, whatever that normal looks like, right? Where there's students who thrive in a face-to-face environment can choose to be in face-to-face, and students who couldn't handle the hybrid model, and then students who can handle the remote model where there is choice, right? Right now, for many parents who are at home, that choice has been eliminated. They've either been put into that hybrid model or they have been put into the fully remote model. So in addition to the frustration that they're experiencing with that, part of that frustration might be fueled by their child, not necessarily that being the ideal learning environment for their child. And so what are some coping strategies, if you will, to help parents to help parents to kind of cope through what we all hope is a short-term solution to what we're all dealing with as a country? I think of parents who have children that have IEPs, for example, and how difficult that is to have that translate into remote or even hybrid learning situations. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I'll say a couple words about that. I'm sure my colleagues have some ideas too, but I would say that we have to recognize that most schools and most systems across the entire planet were not ready for this.
Right.
So one thing that I would say is that as difficult as it might be, everybody needs to take a really deep breath and recognize that everybody had to scramble in order to come up with their own plans in their own districts and their own schools to make things happen. We are right at the beginning of this. And one thing that, and this is my opinion, but I think that things are never going to be going back to what we saw as normal in the past. And that people have to recognize that we have to be realistic about that and think long term and look at this as an opportunity, because it is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for people to look at their entire community and look at this as a full system of people working together to make their schools better and to evolve the systems and to make learning higher quality for their students. It's, we are in the first or second week of school right now. We have had snow days that last for 3 to 5 to 6 to 7 days at a time, and students haven't been able to go to school, and the schools are just shut down and they're not learning, right? And it wasn't the end of the world. So we have to, what I would say is be patient, give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they are working as hard as they can. A lot of this, the pressure has been put on teachers to deal with this. It takes an entire system of people working together to make this happen. So try to look at positive ways to work together to improve the systems, and be patient and compassionate with everyone. All the other parents and the teachers. People are really trying their hardest. Peggy meets with superintendents. She can speak to this. They are tired and stressed. I mean, people are working and doing their very best to make these things happen. So that's my advice there.
I guess, and piggybacking on Will's, I think, as an educator, former principal, I think one of the things that's really critical is establishing routines, right? And these routines are different. And kids need routines. And what you're probably seeing this first week or two is that, or should be seeing, is that teachers are trying to establish routines, okay? And those routines, which is not uncommon in the first week or two of school for teachers to do in the classroom. They're setting up routines for how things are going to work in their classroom. And there are probably going to be some mistakes made and errors as teachers figure out and parents figure out how to log in. And so I would say as a parent, look for those routines. Look for how teachers are establishing those routines. What are the expectations for how kids are going to sign in, sign out, be present, behave, interact with each other, all of the things that you would see when a kid would walk into the classroom. If you have a child who's in middle school or high school, you have access to the syllabus. What does the syllabus say? Making sure you have access to the key learning things are really important. For your kids, set up a place for them to work, make as comfortable as you can. And I realize that for some parents that is a challenge because we're sharing space, but even if it means having a box of stuff that you move to the kitchen table after dinner or before dinner, that you have a routine. And I think checking in with your kids too. I think, for some of our kids may need more support because they're not used to a level of independence that be required of them. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. One of the things we want to do at the end of K-12 is to ensure that kids are independent and lifelong learners. And there might be some rub with that as a parent. I keep saying if my now 30-year-old was home as a middle schooler, I'd probably be ripping my hair out too. So I really, I appreciate that. I do also think, same with Will, that I think everybody, I think things should settle down in the next couple of weeks as those routines are established. And I think teachers, our parents advocating for what it is that you need. What would make this more tenable for you? What are the supports that you need? What kind of training do you need? And push the districts to try to offer that, because many of us are on a range of skills and we could use that training as much as the teachers can use the training. Rebecca.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I see that we have another question come in, so I didn't want to.
Yeah, a couple questions here. So from a performance standpoint, I know parents who were making this decision when we had the deadline this summer, we were looking at the academic scores for virtual schools for compared to like the cyber schools compared to the actual schools that our kids would go to. So from a performance standpoint, do the current academic scores accurately represent the performance of virtual schools? Because at first glance, the cyber schools within the Commonwealth have dismal scores compared to traditional schools. But is that a fair way to assess the virtual schools and cyber schools at this point?
I can take a stab at it briefly. So there's a couple of things here. So one, I would draw our attention to a meta-analysis that was conducted by the Department of Education back in 2009. They reported out in 2010, and I know that's been some time, but that was one of the first times that there was a comparison or a very pointed remark in the abstract that read that distance education can provide better than or equal to learning outcomes as your traditional settings. And so when we draw upon that, it really gets back to all of this planned instructional design, working at a systems approach to make sure that that happens. It's obviously not the case in all places. The other point that I would like to make is that the comparison of traditional and distance education is also an area that is often disputed because it's similar to comparing an apple to an orange. Right? But there are similar components. They're just refocused and they're restructured in a different way. So it's thinking about putting all of your resources up front and then working through the system almost in a more automated fashion. So some of it that I would say is that the comparisons are just the metrics are not the same. So it's hard to really go back and say, what's happening in our cyber schools versus our traditional schools. It's different metrics. So that would be my point. I'll hand it over to my colleagues for their response.
Go ahead, Will.
Well, I would just say that you could also ask the same question about the traditional schools. Can you look at the way that schools are assessed and be sure that those results are actually showing you the true story that's happening.
So we are coming up on our time, but I have two questions that I want to get to. So the first one is, Mark Twain famously said, "Don't let the classroom get in the way of your education," right? and those of us in education, especially higher education, we point to the co-curricular aspect of education. Certainly, we are focused on the curriculum right now and making sure that we are delivering the curriculum so that students get what they need. But there is also that social and emotional and kind of co-curricular stuff that goes on alongside, whether it's clubs and organizations or being part of special projects within a school environment. And that stuff has been somewhat set to the side right now while we figure out the academic and the curriculum piece of it. But talk a little bit about, through a distance education perspective, how do we get some of that co-curricular activity integrated back into this environment?
Well,
That's one of our components in our system.
yeah, it's a big part, and I think you're right, Paul. Right now, the focus has definitely been on, the survival, to the fundamentals. Let's make sure that kids are learning, but the extracurricular piece is very much part of that. And if we look towards other places across the globe that have had distance education in place for a number of years, places like Australia and Canada, because of their geographical location and size, there are ways to provide those. And it can be as simple as, and I'm going to let Rebecca and Will go into some of the specific, but it can be as simple as having student lounges that are in distance education that students can gather, or teachers can gather, or parents can gather as a way to work on projects. It can be groups that are assigned across the school that could be investigating, doing a project-based learning opportunity that's, part of school or before school or after school.
I'll just bounce up on what Peggy said. I totally agree. Most places are in survival mode, and so they haven't been able to address this, but kids are really creative. Kids create their own clubs. They know technology. Parents are very creative. We talk a lot about, Peggy mentioned the student lounge, but districts might consider having a parent lounge where parents can get together and network, come up with creative ways. Maybe while the weather's always good, depending on how well you're dressed, right? But kids can meet in a park and have social distance, and activities can be created. There are other organizations. So, I would just think out of the box, and as time goes on here, think of ways to develop those activities.
So the final question, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Just a final comment as well is that this is a real wonderful opportunity for higher education to be sharing some of their practices with K-12. So for example, Penn State World Campus, we have a very active student affairs group that's always doing student outreach, whether it's local meetups. I know, for example, I participated in a MLK volunteer day out here in San Diego, and I met some of the alums and current students that are located out here. And that was a wonderful opportunity for us. But there's also other ways that we can have outreach with our students to help with the social emotional learning, not only informally, but like thinking about book clubs. How can we develop those, or student government? These things can still take place. But I think higher education has been more developed in this area for quite some time. So there's a lot of lessons learned and effective practices that could be shared.
So this last question, and I realize that the question I'm about to ask is big. So please forgive that. But I think about access to education and equal access to education, and how this pandemic has really put a microscope or a magnifying glass, if you will, on some of those inequities that are apparent across the country. There are people who don't have internet at home that can't get access to remote learning. I think of the way that we have gone about structuring remote learning now has still been in the box of, I'm going to structure it for my school, and there's a wall around that, right? But I think, so moving forward, how do you see what we are going through now making access to education more equitable, or making access to, if there's a teacher in St. Louis teaching a intro to high school engineering, and I have a daughter here in Pennsylvania that wants to take that class, right? How do we structure the delivery of education in the United States in such a way where it doesn't matter that you live in the state college school district, but that you could take a class that's happening in St. Louis or Florida or based on your interest and based on where that expert happens to live and where they happen to be teaching it from. So like I said, I know it's a huge question, but I'm really thinking first and foremost of the socioeconomic and some of the racial inequities that are present, but then also about, as you all framed it, the opportunities to open some of these experts up that live all across the country to students regardless of where they happen to live.
So first of all, I would say that it's actually happening in parts of the United States already where, you know, especially states that are rural, for example, you might have 5 kids who need to take a foreign language in their school, in their high school, but they only offer 1. So there are systems in place already in many states that we need to be looking at to replicate some of those models that are out there so that kids can have access. You know, when you start talking about the United States, you're talking about 50 states where, you know, education is generally the purview of the individual state. So I'm not sure that it would be possible to have a United States sort of open education necessarily, but my colleagues might disagree with me. But I do think we should look towards models that are already out there that have had good success and try to think about how those models can be replicated.
So I would say that the entire premise of distance education has always been to provide access and equity to students who may not have had that previously, right? So when we are talking about correspondence education, as Will was sharing, and how students were learning through the radio or telecommunication technologies, it's always been because they were not able to physically be there for socioeconomic reasons, for racial reasons, gender reasons, all sorts of unfortunately marginalized populations. And so distance education has already been front and center to provide access and equity. So to that point, I think getting back and recognizing that there are communities that do not have access to technology, it is okay to provide a correspondence packet. It gets back to that other point that I was making earlier about multimodal learning opportunities and the fact that students, if you're designing and developing content for your course, if it's in an online format, make sure that it's also printable. So thinking about the use of color, if you're going to provide a video, think about closed captioning and transcription so that a student who may not have internet or may have weak broadband access could read that information in a packet. So it's getting back to thinking about equitable access, but using universal design learning standards definitely can help support those things. So I would strongly advocate that distance education has always been about equity and access, and some of the things that have been happening in a more recent stance have been the development of MOOCs, thinking about globalization and internationalization as students are learning across not only state boundaries, but also international boundaries. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that also helps reinstate the asynchronous opportunities, realizing that students are learning through various time zones. There's a lot of support there when we're thinking about asynchronous modality.
Excellent. Well, look, you all are doing some great work here at Penn State in this realm. Thank you so much for joining us and for your presentation and for answering the questions from those who have joined us here today. We're truly grateful for all that you are doing for Penn State and for education. That's all the time that we have today. Again, thank you for joining. As a reminder, we will be hosting additional speaker sessions in the coming weeks and months. And this programming is in addition to a wide array of online networking and career programs that are available throughout the year. You can view a full listing on our website at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thanks again, and we are
Penn State.